Good evening and welcome to this very timely forum about the DACA executive order. I'm Julia Lara, the Vice President of the DC Latino Council. The DC Latino Council is a recently formed organization that works on behalf of DC Latinos in the metropolitan area. We're interested in a number of issues, of a range of issues related to the well-being of the Latino community and Latino students in particular. And these issues encompass housing, immigration, economic development, employment, and many others. We are fairly new, but we have a number of projects, including a project focusing on DC statehood, and in the near future, we hope to expand our scope of work so that we can more appropriately serve the population that we care deeply about. If they are board members of the DC Latino Council in the room, and I think there's two, right? I would like them to introduce themselves, but one of them is on the panel, and the other one I will introduce, so perhaps we should wait till then. That may be the best approach. We also want to thank our partner organizations, specifically the DC Latino Caucus, Ayuda, and I believe those are the two major organizations that are supporting this particular event. I also like to say that this program is being live streamed on the web, and so we want to extend our thanks to those people that are watching via the web. Our next speaker is Franklin Garcia, who is not a stranger to many of us in this area. Franklin is the president of the DC Latino Council and the U.S. Shadow Representatives for DC. Franklin was elected U.S. Representative Shadow for the District of Columbia on November 4, 2014. He is working to bring democracy to almost 700,000 people in our nation's capital by helping to make the District of Columbia the 51st state in the Union. Representative Garcia came to live in Washington, D.C. with his parents and sister at the age of 10. He holds an undergraduate degree in finance from the George Washington University and a Master's of Arts degree in financial economics and public policy from American University. He is the founder of the DCireporter and the DC Statehood Today TV show, and is an active member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Without further ado, Representative Garcia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lara. I'm very excited to be here. I am actually pleased to see that given the conditions that we have in the Washington, D.C. area, that we actually have an audience, which is very good. I think our online audience is probably a little greater than what we have in here, but nevertheless, we're excited that everybody has joined. I know that we're going to have a special treat. We have Hector Rodriguez who called. He actually made it to the other campus. So he's actually driving right now to come out here. Some people got it confused, but we're excited that he'll make it here. But anyways, what I wanted to do is I just want to take a few minutes here and give you a little overview of the situation, how I see it, mainly touching on the immigration, not necessarily related to DACA, but you have a panel of experts here that are going to talk about DACA. But let me first make my DC statehood pitch real quick. And related to that, though, is we know that in Washington, D.C., immigration affects the residents, those immigrants here, because we're not a state. And that's why we need to change that. We know that historically, what we have had in the city is a memorandum of understanding where the mayor has issued a memorandum of understanding to the community, letting them know that they're not going to ask people immigration status for the purposes of providing services. In many cases, that has been extended as what we know today to be a sanctuary city, which includes not really participating in programs that relate to immigration officers. In other words, they don't have our city police officers behaving in a way that interacts with the federal authority. And so that's how we are different. We also are different in that because we are a federal territory, we're not allowed by law to use monies for the purposes of stopping deportation proceedings. Not federal funding anyway. Our mayor has managed to use local funding. I think she set up a $5 million fund to help for that purpose. But what I wanted to say is that the situation we have in our country right now, the immigration friction that you're seeing right now isn't really anything new. I mean, if we go back to history, we can kind of like see that when the country is born in 1776, the Constitution is ratified in 1789, our national capital is in 1801, and so the new people that now become the new generations of Americans after that time began to sense some friction when right around the time when they see that the Industrial Revolution is over, maybe 30, 40 years after that, and the country is changing. More skilled labor is needed to deal with the automation and machinery and everything that brought the Industrial Revolution. You begin to see this sense of people not really wanting so much immigration. So around, and in a sense, and an indication of that right away, we see in 1870 with the Asian Exclusion Act, and that it's an interesting phenomenon. How what we do is we start really in 1920 to implement some very, very strict measures for immigration. So in 1921, we have this Emergency Quota Act, and at that time, this is the first time when we actually capped people coming into our nation. And so you can see that if you look at the numbers of immigrants coming in 1920, it was about 800,000, and shortly after that was put in place, it drops down to about 300,000. And then we continue with a series of measures in the 1920s to exclude people. And really, it's only until 1965, under the administration of Johnson, that we see this opening and change in immigration situation. And so really between 1920 and 1965, with the exclusion of maybe the Cubans who came in the 50s, the early 50s, then there was a program, the Bracero program, in the 1940s that allowed Mexicans to come in. And then, of course, you had the Europeans that came in due mainly to the Holocaust and the situation that was going on. But really, that was a period of not so much immigration. Now, in 1965, it opens up, right? But really, the intention of it was really to get, it's what, when we start this family, what Donald Trump is calling the chain migration, the family chain migration, right, or the family reunification, as some others call it. But the idea, though, even in 1965, was more, I think, to get those existing immigrants that were here to get their families to come over. So naturally, it was geared towards getting more Europeans to come in, because those were the people that were allowed to come in. And so you would think that the family members of those would be Europeans. Well, they ended up getting a bunch of non-Europeans, right? And so you have a situation then when, and I'm going to wrap up the historical perspective, but then you have other, you had in 86 with Reagan, who gave amnesty to a bunch of people. Basically, everybody that was here undocumented got legalized. And then in 1990, you got Senator Kennedy, who also kind of like amended that and allowed more immigrants to come in. And I think legally he raised it up to somewhere around 700,000. people that would come in legally. I think now we're up to 1 million people who are allowed in legally. Anyways, I'll go ahead and bring now our good friend Jose Barrios, who is going to continue with the moderation. Thank you so much for doing this, Joe. Sure. All right.
Thank you, Franklin. Like you said, I'm Joe Barrios. I'm the Vice President of the DC Latino Caucus. The caucus is the political voice of Latinos in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and I'm very pleased to be moderating this forum tonight. Without further ado, I am going to introduce our panelists and provide a brief background for each of them. I'll start with Mr. Barnes. Johnny Barnes is a trial attorney and an expert on civil liberties, as well as federal and local legislative processes. He's a publisher and founder of Living with the Law, a periodic legal news publication that has been in circulation for 29 years. He spent more than a quarter century in various congressional staff positions, including service as Chief of Staff for 3 members of Congress. He has been the Executive Director of the ACLU for the nation's capital for 11 years, and he continues to devote much of his time to the quest for DC statehood, and he predicts it will happen within our lifetime. Mr. Barnes graduated cum laude from Central State University and received his Juris Doctor from Georgetown University Law Center. Dr. Silvia Martinez is an associate professor at Howard University, Department of Communication Science and Disorders. Dr. Martinez is someone I'm also pleased to serve with, as she is the president of the DC Latino Caucus, which, as I said before, serves as a channel for the participation and involvement of Latinos in civic engagement and political activities in the DC area. She has received numerous recognitions from the ASHA for her service and multicultural contributions to the professions. Dr. Martinez received her bachelor's in psychology and special education and her master's in speech and language pathology from the University of Puerto Rico. She also holds a doctorate of education in applied psycholinguistics from Boston University and CAS, Administration, Planning, and Social Policy, International Education from Howard University. Harvard University. My apologies. Next, Ms. O'Rourke is an immigration attorney. She's also the Gallup Fellow for Ayuda. She is an Oklahoman and has been doing humanitarian-based immigration law in Northern Virginia and DC. Attorney O'Rourke's professional interests include immigration, international human rights, and social corporate responsibility. She has taught English abroad in Viña del Mar, Chile, and has been a legislative associate in the U.S. as for the representative from Oklahoma City, facilitating and coordinating communication between the representative, legislators, state officials, staff, agency personnel, stakeholders, and constituents in the development and advancement of legislation. She's also the head representative of the University of Oklahoma College of Law at the Barbary Group, and she received her Juris Doctor in International and Legal Studies from the University of Oklahoma College of Law. Last but not least is Ilsy Marylin Bu. Ilsy is a DACA recipient, as well as a communications associate and immigration advocate. She has worked in radio, print, and television for Univision and Televisión for the 2008 Obama election, and FCC translator Fox 5 as a Spanish translator. A radio commentator for Honduras Radio, 950 AM, Cabin John in Maryland, and Arlington Independent Media, and the Washington Post, El Tiempo Latino newspaper. She began advocating for immigration reform in 2005 by organizing the high school walkouts in Fairfax County, Virginia, lobbying in Congress, and other such efforts that later opened the path for what is now DACA. She has been at the front of advocating for DACA for the last 13 years. She graduated from Northern Virginia Community College with 2 liberal arts degrees in communications and linguistics. She is currently enrolled at UDC, pursuing a degree in psychology and behavioral science. She sits on the board of the DC Latino Leadership Council and is a Honduran native who has been living in the United States since 2000. Finally, she's a Ward 4 DC resident. And with that, we will go right to our questions. The first question is for Johnny. Can you please explain what grounds the ACLU has for suing the Trump administration over DACA and where that process is now? Please use the microphone in front of you.
Okay. I was going to lay a foundation, so I can do that first before, okay, because that helps to illuminate the question or the answer to the question. But if you reside in the United States or any of its territories in the Commonwealth, then no matter where you go in the world, and that's if you're a temporary or permanent resident, no matter where you go in the universe, you're protected by the Constitution of the United States. You don't have to be a citizen to be protected by the Constitution of the United States. You only need to be here. And that's the genius of that document. And when the Constitution was created, it would not have passed if we didn't have a Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, because the wiser of the Founding Fathers insisted that we have a Bill of Rights so we would no longer suffer under the very dangerous conditions that the King of England had burdened us with. There was a time when if you said something the king didn't like, off with your head. If you had something in your home that the king wanted, the king could send the redcoats into your home and take it without your consent and without a reason, without probable cause, to use modern day language. And so the Founding Fathers said we can't have that kind of situation. We need 10 amendments that prescribe exactly what the war was about. And the centerpiece of those 10 amendments is the Fifth Amendment. It's right in the center, because it embodies the Due Process Clause. We have protection in our life, liberty, and property because of the Fifth Amendment. So important is the Due Process Clause that it's repeated in the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment ordinarily only applies to the states, but because we have the separation of the branches, the 14th Amendment also applies to the District of Columbia through the Fifth Amendment. So that double centerpiece applies to us just like it applies to anybody else. Now, of course, if you're a non-citizen, you can't vote. We can't vote in Washington, D.C. for senators and representatives who have a vote. But Franklin's working on that. And every day we get closer and closer. In fact, the stars have aligned to the point that I think we're closer than we've ever been. And I've been working on this issue for 40 years. There's no reason that I shed my rights coming from Indiana in the shadow of the Washington Monument just because I crossed an invisible line. And Franklin's working on that and doing a good job. But we're at a dangerous time. I'm going to answer the question, Joe. We're at a dangerous time in our history. Not unlike after 9/11, the hysteria after 9/11. And the ACLU stepped forward then, and the ACLU is stepping forward now. The American Civil Liberties Union is the first line of defense for the Constitution and the last line of defense for the Bill of Rights. A state trooper put a gun to my head when I was in college for no reason, and I said, I'm going to tell the ACLU. I didn't know how to reach them. That's just the reputation that the organization had. The inscribed above the Supreme Court are these words: equal justice under law. They got it wrong. It should say equal law under justice. Because what some people, like Mr. Trump, will do is ignore the law. He even said that for the gun toters. He said, take the guns first and then give them a hearing. That's unconstitutional. And that's his vision of the world. Law is more important than justice. And so it's important for us to coalesce, to meet, to understand, to work to preserve the Constitution because it preserves us. If they come for our Latino brothers and sisters in the daytime, they will surely come for the rest of us at night. So we can't let Mr. Trump make the Constitution and the Bill of Rights the first casualty of his war to make America white again.
So what is the primary constitutional argument that the ACLU is using to protect Dreamers?
I'm getting there. The ACLU filed a lawsuit, class action lawsuit in Southern California because the DACA recipients were their rights to grants and work permits were being withdrawn, and many were being subject to deportation for minor offenses simply because that's what the Homeland Security did. They were the law. And the ACLU filed this class action lawsuit which said that the due process clause of the Constitution does not allow that. They have to have a hearing. You can't do it without a hearing. The Federal Administrative Procedure Act has the same due process protections that you can't just run somebody on a railroad out of town. And 4 days ago, the court granted the injunction that the ACLU was seeking in that case. So that's a serious and significant and major victory in that situation. And it applies not just to Southern California, but wherever citizens and non-citizens are, whether you're temporarily in the United States or permanently in the United States. So it's a major victory. And the one message I want to leave tonight, and I'll finish, is that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Everybody ought to be involved. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak tonight, and I appreciate what Franklin and others are doing to keep this movement, not a moment, Franklin, but to keep this movement alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next question will be for Silvia. Okay, can you discuss the role that advocacy organizations like the DC Latino Caucus play or can play in the DACA debate and in the overall immigration reform debate?
I'm liking the theme that I'm hearing, because I think the focus has to be that this is not a problem of the DACA people. This is a situation for all of us in the United States, because again, we just have to follow through with protecting the people that we have here in the United States. I'm going to give you some statistics about Hispanics, and the majority of the people that are taking advantage of the DACA are Hispanics. Back in 2000, about 1/3 of our children were dropping out of high school. Today, only like 10% drop out of high school. College enrollment, back in 1993, we only had like 22% of Hispanics in universities. 2016, 46% of our students, 3.6 million kids Hispanics are in college. We've had the largest increase than any other population in terms of those going to college. In terms of dropout, we're still, the dropout rate, even though it has dropped, is still higher than the other populations. We have, 2014, we have about 15% of our kids who are 25 to 29 have a college degree, a bachelor's degree. And almost half of our students are attending public two-year schools. So we're still lagging in having our kids, our Hispanic kids, go to four-year schools. Now, this is really interesting because we're at the moment where we have the highest number of students not dropping out and in college, and now we have a situation in which we want to take these same children and have them go away from our country. So we have had a big problem of not having our kids educated, participating completely, getting good jobs, and at this moment, those same kids are going to be asked to leave. So this is something that is not only affecting them, but it's affecting us as a Hispanic community. But we have to remember, a lot of those Hispanic kids, and I'm talking about kids, but we're also talking about adults, are parents to black children, and a lot of those black kids or adults that are taking advantage of DACA are parents to Hispanic children. So this is a situation for all of us in the community. There is some suggestions that because of DACA, about 25,000 students have actually completed their GED. And from Harvard, it looks like they're saying that DACA has also helped the children, our Hispanic kids, also pursue educational attainment. Also, the National Bureau of Economic Research has found that there's also more high school attainment and college attendance. So this is a population, and not only Hispanics, we're talking about people from a whole bunch of other nations who were wanting and desiring to go to school, to educate themselves, to participate actively and in a constructive way to the society, and has been given this opportunity, and we might lose them all and go back to where we were. So I'm talking, this is my college professor hat, I guess, an educational professor.
So how could advocacy organizations help them?
So what I'm getting to is that we need to work with many advocacy agencies, organizations, not only us Hispanics by ourselves, but this has to be a collaborative movement, like you're saying. Not only a segment should be addressing that. I think the other thing that we have to do, of course, is continue to educate our community about these issues and go and transcend talking about the immigrant that has to leave, but talk about what are the implications of our communities when things are happening this way, where families are separated, and when we have arrived to a point where we have this population that has been educated, and then we're at risk of losing not only these students, but also the people who are working, their teachers, etc., that again is going to affect trickle down. One more thing I want to say is, education, again, affects all of us. So the more educated we have our population, the more our children are going to be enhanced. So it's a trickle-down situation. It really is a trickle-down situation. Now, we also have to be very clear that, you know, sometimes systems put something into place to keep some populations from getting empowered. And so, you know, those are things that we have to deal with. I'm part of the Democratic State Committee, and we have put out some resolutions, so it's part of our education. And yeah, so that's basically it.
Okay, thank you. And I was informed that for the format is actually each panelist should be able to speak 5 minutes on the as an introduction and then ask the question. So I apologize for not following that. I will do so going forward. Okay, so the third question will go to Ilsy. So Ilsy, why don't you take about 5 minutes for your introduction?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for being here, and I'm very grateful that this was put together, not just to discuss about DACA, the situation, the state of the over close to 1 million recipients now, but also, you know, not only the recipients are being affected by this, but the families and, you know, perhaps their classmates, their neighbors, you know, even their partners that perhaps are now involved with DACA recipients that are citizens or permanent residents. So this is a cycle that isn't just affecting this small group, right, of DACA recipients. And as you heard, my background that I've been here in the U.S. for 18 years, and throughout the 18 years, thankfully, I've been surrounded by people that have supported you. But at the same time, it doesn't matter as much support as you have from your family, from your friends, you know, classmates and, you know, colleagues that you meet at your work. When the law limits you and puts a wall in front of you, that creates a lot of barriers, you know, especially for myself, for my education, you know. As you heard, I started at the Northern Virginia Community College, you know, and I've managed to somehow try to finish that. And when I look at other people my age, and if they've gone further, and it's, you know, you have to decide whether you want to continue being the victim or become resilient by that and see how much you can accomplish, right? But I think that if the last immigration reform that we had back in the 80s when Reagan passed this, so think about that's over 30 years now, you know, and I think that if there would have been a reform by now, all these barriers to obtain, you know, to pursue a further education for over 1 million people now, that would have been completely wiped out. So think about all the jobs, all the professions that would have been created by now, right? The revenue, the income, the economy, how prosperous it would be with all this coming, with all these professionals rising in society. So I think it's very important to continue this conversation, and like as Anthony Barnes and Mr. Johnny Barnes said, this isn't something for the moment. It's a movement. It needs to stay. Because as I was watching this video today about you know, when East LA, when the Chicanos, you know, rose up and when they you know, they started protesting, doing the walkouts. When back then, you know, the Mexican American kids were being discriminated in school in East LA. They were sent to a different school. It's kind of when back then with the Jim Crow laws, right? The black students were on one side, the white students were on another side. This was the same thing happening in the 50s, less than 50 years ago with the Latinos back in East LA, when Chicanos, when they rose up. That was the first time there was a Latino movement. And it's still going, not just in the Latino community, but in all immigrants community, even within the white minorities, right, that come from small towns. They're being faced, they're exposed to, that they feel threatened by immigrants that are in the big cities, right? So I think this is, the bigger issue here is the system that we're under, right? The system that this government is ruling upon society. And as a community, we all need to maintain this movement and talk about more about these issues, right? And if it isn't affecting us personally, we have to look around and say, how is it going to affect us eventually, and increase that movement and that strength and that's going to empower us, and and we will see results from this. So that's my response.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilsy. So the question for you is, could you please share your experience as a DACA recipient, how it has benefited you, and what it means to be in limbo right now?
Okay. So as I stated, I came here in the U.S. from Honduras in 2000, and I was in 6th grade. I was living in Prince William County in Manassas, and then I finished my high school here in Mount Vernon High School in Fairfax County. And after that, like I said, the obstacles of seeking further education. As a child, you don't realize that you're undocumented. You just look at yourself, and then you look at your friends, and you're the same. You have the same dreams. You have the same goals. But then once you're about to get out of high school, then you start to notice that there are certain things that you can't follow your friends with, right? You can't go and get your license after you're 15, 16 years old. Right? You can't get a part-time while you're in middle school, that they limit you to work a certain amount of hours because you don't have a Social Security. You're applying for all these colleges. I got accepted to VCU and to George Washington University. Oh, great. You're qualified as an international student, but you don't have the money. These are struggles, right? And then once DACA came in the picture back in 2012, it did feel like a relief coming off your shoulder. The main relief, is it sounds so insignificant to everyone else, but the same week I was able to go to the DMV in Virginia and get my state ID. That's a huge accomplishment for someone that feels like this is the only country that you can kind of remember through your adulthood, right, through your teenage years. And to get an ID and not having to carry your passport just to go to the movie theaters, that's a big step. So when DACA came in the picture, being able to get your ID was a big process. It's a huge motivation that things are gonna start opening up, right? However, per state, it was a conditional thing. If we were granted in-state tuition in Virginia, we weren't granted in-state tuition until 2014, 2 years, almost 3 years, when DACA, the deferred action, was passed. But there was that hope. Well, now we have permits, right? Now we can get our driver's license. So it was a great relief because now you're being accepted into society, which is it's wrong. It's inhumane that if you weren't accepted before, then what were you considered, right? What was your title? How were you being labeled in society? So, and then now we're moving forward to what's going on with the administration that we have in front of us, and then we think about all those years that some people have been here before. I came here when I was 12. There's people that have been here since they were 2, 3 years old. So you think about all these years these people have been here, and then you have this administration now telling you that it doesn't matter all these years before you, meaning that your life before today, it never matters. So think about that, right? Think about all the efforts, everything that you went through from yesterday and on. None of that is being thrown in the trash can. So that's inhumane, That's like taking away your dignity, taking away your entire life. So, it's like you're at a state that, as all of us, we all have plans, right? Not just professionally, but, personally, everything. But you have to put that on the side, and you have to start thinking about alternative options. I have like 3 other plans that if March 5th on Monday comes in, and the DREAM Act it completely dies, like it's officially dead. Now I have to think about, I need to make a choice. Am I gonna stay here in DC in the United States? And if I decide to stay here, how am I gonna live? Do I need to move somewhere? Do I need to take alternative options? Like, do I need to continue my school? Do I need to change address? I mean, all these things, because now you feel like a fugitive. You feel like you don't belong, you're not wanted in the land this is the only land I came here when I was 12, but this is the only land I know. If I go back to Honduras, I'm going to get kidnapped and I'm going to get killed like a lot of my friends did, And this is the reality. And I think that back then in 2012, You know, no one knew what DACA was, only those that were close to someone that qualified to that. Now the entire world has DACA in their mouth, right? But they're still not grasping the reality, right? The severity of what's really about to happen, you know, because it's not on just these recipients, but it's on the families, right? If they deport these people, what's going to happen to those that have cars, have homes, to their debt, you know, to their bills? Who's going to take care of that, you know? So we really need to put these things into perspective to society, you know, to those that say, oh, I feel sorry for these people. I'm with you. We're going to go protest in front of the White House. But that's not enough, you know? We need more people to be out there in the front, you know, at the front, you know, not just those that are being affected by it, but those that have nothing to do with this, nothing to do with immigration. You know, they can go about their days. They can wake up, they can go to work, they can hang out with their families on the weekends, or they can go to another state to visit their families. They will never be affected by this. Those are the people also that we need to get more involved in this and think about, well, what would you do if tomorrow the president tells you, you know what, I'm going to take everything away from you? What are you going to do? I mean, what's your next plan? You know, this is the reality, and it sounds very pessimistic, but this is really what's come down to, you know. And if there's any silver lining, I think, from Trump being he wasn't, as we all know, he wasn't elected. He did not get the popular vote. But him being now, I don't want to call him the president, but the man that is in the White House right now. If there's a silver lining to all this, I keep telling people that it's like, if this is the push that we've needed, you know, that to get something done from the DREAM Act, then I guess it's a good thing that he's there, you know, because I think that if we would have had Hillary, we would have had the same conversation with President Obama, you know, it's like he had to make a choice. Do I push for an immigration reform, or do I push for health care, you know? He chose to go with health care, you know what I mean? So it would have been the same conversation if Hillary would have been elected. So I think that, again, if there's something good that has come out of all this, of the Trump administration, I think it's the push, right, that we need to get this going, because there are people, you know, hanging in the line, right? Not just the people, but an entire community, that these people have gone inside and, like, you know, you've been influenced by everyone, you know. So it's not, if they get 900,000 people deported, then now you still have to deal with those lives. The country still have to deal with those lives. You can't just paint over that. You have to repair those cracks, right? So I think that, and I'm sure, you know, I don't want to speak for all the DACA recipients, but I think we kind of all share the same sentiment. It's like the uncertainty, right? Like, what do we do now? You know, you have to stay focused and, you know, optimistic and keep, you know, looking forward that I'm going to continue with my regular plans. But at the same time, I have to think of other alternatives. If I have to go, then what do I need to start? How do I prepare myself for that, you know? And one of the questions that you asked was that, like, is there a concern, you know, for dreamers to be involved in some kind of activism to show their faces? But I think that history has shown us that, like, those that are being the ones getting intimidated and being attacked, you need to show your face, because eventually, like, you need to fight for those stuff, right? And then, but I think the fight becomes better, and these people that are being attacked, you know, get more empowered by having the community back you up, you know, even those that aren't being affected personally. So I think that we need to encourage more people to come out the shadows. But if we're asking for people to come out the shadows, there needs to be that support also to back them up as well.
Thank you, Ilsy, for that very moving response. I know I'm not alone in believing that America would be less great without you. The next question is for Corie. Well, we're not going to go to the question right away. We're going to allow for the introductory statement.
So I want to take a minute to explain some of the background behind DACA and the DREAM Act. As Ilsy mentioned, a lot of people are talking about DACA, and they know it's a big issue in our country right now, but they don't understand how we got to this point and what exactly DACA is legally. So the DREAM Act, where Dreamers came from, is the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act. And it's a proposed bill that was introduced in the U.S. Senate for the first time in 2001, so 17 years ago. in those 17 years, there's been lots of variations of the DREAM Act that have been brought forward that has been almost passed. There's been a lot of bipartisan support for many of these variations, but we've never managed to pass any variation of the act. The DREAM Act came closest to being passed in 2010 under President Obama. It passed in the House of Representatives, and then in the Senate, it was, I believe, 5 votes short. So 5 votes are the reason that we're having this conversation today. And the DREAM Act was a path, the idea behind it is a path to permanent residency for individuals that were brought to the United States as minors. So in 2012, President Obama decided, this legislative path is not working, so I'm going to create DACA. And what DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So for people that arrived in the United States as children, we're deferring action. What's the action we're deferring? Deporting them. So DACA in itself is just saying, we're not going to deport you right now. We might do it later. And it's always been in 2-year increments. So DACA itself has always been temporary, and when you think about it as just a promise to defer deportation, it doesn't sound quite as nice. So President Trump came into power, and in September of last year, he announced that DACA was going to be ending, that he was no longer going to provide this deferred action. And on October 5th, the government stopped taking applications for DACA. Now, there's been several court cases that have come up, and early 2018, there was an injunction put forward that said the government has to accept DACA applications again, as things were pre-September 2017, until a decision's made. So at this moment, people can apply for renewal of DACA. People who have never had DACA cannot apply for the first time now. But people who have had it in the past or have it now can apply. However, this is an injunction that only lasts until the Court of Appeals deals with the said court cases. There's 2 major court cases. So it's not anything permanent. So we're kind of in this moment where we're holding our breath, and for this moment, people can renew their DACA, and they should, if they're able to. But we don't know what the future is going to hold, and another court case is coming, and we're going to see what happens with it. Even if everything goes best case scenario in the courts, this is still temporary. DACA will always be temporary deferred action. The only way to permanently change the situation for these individuals is through legislation, like the DREAM Act.
Okay. All right. So the question is, can you share your thoughts on what process DACA recipients should follow if they're needing help? So for example, if they've lost their status due to Trump's action, are there any available resources for DACA recipients possibly to reapply in some way? And specifically in the District of Columbia, or very local here to the metropolitan area, where can DACA recipients go if they need help with their individual cases?
So anyone who currently has DACA or who has had DACA in the past that has expired or has been terminated may have the option to renew their DACA and get it extended. So I recommend that all those people see an immigration attorney for help in this process. In the past, you could only apply for renewal of your DACA within a certain time frame before the expiration, but people, with the help of their attorneys, have been sending in their renewals even a year or more in advance, which in the past would not have been done, but given that we're in this weird moment, people are trying things just to see how it works out, and they haven't been getting rejected. So even if your DACA doesn't expire for what feels like a long time, a year or more, you really should be seeing an immigration attorney. The other thing I want to note is that a lot of DACA recipients have other immigration remedies that they can apply for, and they may be totally unaware of this, especially if they've been doing the DACA renewal themselves for many years, or if they've been going to a notary or some non-attorney to renew their DACA, so it's really important to meet with a licensed attorney and see what kind of other options are available. Many of those options take many years to get a result, so it's important to start acting now. There's many immigration nonprofit legal providers in the DC area. The immigration court website has a listing of them. I also checked today and just Googled immigration legal nonprofits DC, and several reputable websites come up that have directories of all those organizations. I work for one of those organizations, Ayuda. I also, to this event, brought a list of nonprofit organizations in the DMV area if anyone wants one after the presentation. But there are people who want to help you. You just have to ask for it. So make sure that you find yourself a legal representative.
Thank you. Next question will be for Johnny. What protections do undocumented individuals currently have, if any?
Well, as I said at the outset, that due process applies to not only to citizens but non-citizens. So any rights that undocumented individuals may have now can only be taken away through a process that allows the individual to have a right to a lawyer, a right to know what they're being accused of, a right to confront those who are accusing them, the right to have as I said, a hearing so that things aren't done in the dark of night. Now, even though someone may face deportation, and you hear these sad cases that ICE comes and picks up people and ushers them away, there are many other success stories, and I think it's important that if someone is facing that kind of problem, again, get a lawyer as quickly as you can. And I've seen some extraordinarily successful stories when people fight, and especially if there are groups of people who are working with that individual and helping. Trump may seem Trump who thinks he can fire the Attorney General and fire Mueller and fire everybody may seem like a king. But I always say the power of the people is stronger than the people in power.
I'd also ask the same question of the other attorney on the panel, Corie, if you have anything to add.
Something that a lot of immigrants don't know are that some of the rights that apply to U.S. citizens also apply to them, regardless of whether they have DACA or do not. So every person has the right to remain silent. So if ICE shows up at your house or at your workplace, you don't have to tell. In some states, you're required to tell your name, but you're not required to give any other information. Where you were born, what your status is, you don't have to say anything. You also have the right to an attorney. And you have a right to due process, as we were talking about. So you have the right to, fight your case in front of a competent judge, and it's really important to stand up for those rights. ICE in particular uses a lot of intimidating tactics to try to convince people to give up those rights and to try to convince people that they don't even have those rights. So it's really important to understand your rights in the United States and to assert them. There's lots of Know Your Rights presentations around the DC area put on by various nonprofits teaching immigrants about their rights and doing role plays and trying different situations. So I would encourage individuals, even if you're not an immigrant, to attend it, because it's really great to know what your community members are going through, and so you can share information.
Thank you both. The next question for Ilsy. You talked some about the importance of being seen and being loud and being heard, but and we talked about risks for undocumented individuals. There are risks, right? Can you talk more about what those risks actually could be, and how could undocumented individuals maybe help to reduce or minimize those risks, or how other people might help reduce those risks.
Yes, I think that one of the things that we've always worked around with some of these groups that we've always, we've been on the streets, whether it's just through a peaceful demonstration or some kind of agitation, is that as much as we want to get the word out there, and as much as we want to, get the message out there that, like many of the phrases says like, we're here to stay, we're not going anywhere. We also have to be wise, and we also have to make sure that we stay, we keep that in the back of our heads that, that whatever your status is, if you're under a DACA status, if you're, for example, I went on this road trip, and I knew that my expiration, it was a political road trip from Maine all the way to El Paso, Texas. I knew that this was around from February to May. My DACA was expiring in June. So I was fully aware that I could not afford to get in trouble, to get detained by any police officer. One was because I was already out of Washington, D.C., which is fair to say that is one of the most protected places for any immigrant, not just a DACA person. The police, the MPD and here in D.C., it's one of the most fair police departments in this country so far that I've seen from some of the states that I've been to. So that's one thing that you have to keep, be mindful, right? That as much as you want to be involved, but if you also have, like, back to what I said before, but if you're surrounded by a group of people that are fully aware of your situation, right? That know your limits, how much you can go, how much you can be at the front and how much you can push, and if the rest that you cannot do, you have to let them do that for you, if whenever they would do a sit-in, or if they would do some kind of, arrange getting arrested in front of the Capitol, you have to step back as an undocumented or a documented immigrant, because that's going to come after you and bite you in the back, Even if I would like to get it, that's something that I want, but some activists, would like to get arrested just for the moment, just to be part of the scene. But that's not something that you should. That's not. You're not on that. That's not your position as a DACA recipient or as a whatever. If you're not a U.S. citizen or a resident, you should be mindful of that. And that's why I think it's very important for every member of society to support these movements, not just the Latino movement, any other movement out there, because everybody has their limits, and if you have a limit that takes you up to here, you need to be involved with other people that will be able to take it further from you. So people do have to be mindful of that, when we call on people to be on the streets, know your limits, right? Know your limits and know how much your rights, are there to protect you, even though, like Attorney Barnes said, the Constitution is there, the Bill of Rights are there for, U.S. citizens or immigrants, but at the same time, you don't know what kind of police, you're going to encounter. Maybe you're going to encounter somebody that's having a bad day and they don't care and they'll just detain you. That's going to be bad for you in the long run, So it does matter a lot that if we get a lot of civic engagement from all types of groups, not just immigrant groups, not just Latino groups, from everybody, because people need to know that, even these people that are undocumented, aren't afraid to show their faces, to be exposed. That needs to be a reason also to say, what, these people are doing this, we need to protect them, we need to take care of them. Last year when the first Women's March, it was kind of overwhelming, and it was an amazing thing that, there was millions of people were here, like close to 1 million people were just in Washington, D.C. And a lot of the message that they were saying is that we're here to stay and we're not going anywhere. We're not just marching for women's rights, but we're marching for immigrants' rights. And a lot of these banners that I saw, it says that we're here for immigrants, to protect these immigrants. So to see a flood of people saying that we're here for you, I mean, that's a big thing, not just like an emotional and a sentimental level. But on a, it puts things into perspective that, the administration that we see in the White House is trying to paint a picture that all Americans, not just white Americans, that all Americans are here with the same slogan that make America great again. And that's not the reality of this country, So it's very important to spread this word that everybody needs to be involved, because they also need to be fully aware that there are limits to these people that are out there on the streets putting their faces, and they're under a great danger, and that's why we need to protect everybody, so.
Okay, thank you. Next question for Silvia. What are some good, high-impact ways that people can get involved in activism regarding DACA?
Okay. I'm going to follow through with your theme. I think everybody here has to commit to protect our neighbors. We're talking about a humane issue here, so we do have to protect our neighbors. So even as individuals, we have to make it our duty to be on the lookout. For example, sometimes we'll have in the city, we'll have these pieces of paper telling people to call immigration on your, those are the things that we have to be on the lookout for. As soon as we get something like that, just tear it up and let other people know. So even with something as simple as that. The other thing that is happening is that there are a lot of people that may be taking advantage of undocumented residents and the DACA persons, because they have to fill out paperwork, and sometimes the terminology that we use in Latin America is different from here. So somebody who's a public notary here, well, in some places we might call a lawyer a notary in another country. And so there might be some people here misrepresenting themselves as a notary, knowing that people may understand them to be lawyers. So again, it's up to us it's sort of like a personal commitment to take care of our neighbors. And when they're talking about finding a person, have them that feel that you can protect them, and they can actually talk about what their process is, so that you can then also help guide them to further on any process that they're supposed to be doing. When we're the DC Latino Caucus right now is working on a paper, on policy paper on issues, and one of our commitments that we have done are two things really, is to try to reach out to all the ward Democrats and engage them, and at least educating them about DACA and other issues pertaining to Hispanics. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to do, is to go to the different wards and just educate the persons. I know that Ward 4 has already talked to us and say that they really want to start working with us. So I guess, as we go little by little, educating the people, they'll want to participate. And I think any organization, I'm at Howard University, so my goal right now, my personal goal, is each and every one of my students is going to be an advocate. So, everybody that's next to us, it's, you have to educate them so that they can also work at the struggle the best way that they can.
Thank you. So that wraps it up for the questions that we had prepared in advance of this forum. So I want to thank our panelists for answering those questions. And at this point in the program, we are going to move to questions from the audience.